It started on a Thursday, which was the one day in the week Callum Reeves didn't have back-to-back meetings. The morning had arrived unusually quiet, sunlight pooling across the marble floor of his penthouse apartment like it had been poured carefully, respectfully, not to wake anyone. For once, he had a few unscheduled hours before the quarterly strategy review at his firm. He sat at the long, glossy kitchen island, suited from the waist up in a pressed button-down shirt and navy blazer, sweatpants on below the camera's frame. His laptop was closed. The espresso machine hissed behind him. Somewhere down the hall, his daughter giggled, a short, silvery sound he hadn't heard enough of lately. Callum glanced at the clock, 7:42 a.m. "Lena," he called, voice still catching with sleep, "are you almost ready?" "I'm doing a drawing," she answered from her bedroom, followed by the unmistakable scrape of crayons against paper. "Wait 5 more minutes." He exhaled through his nose and sipped his coffee. 5 more minutes was manageable. It wasn't a school morning, just another appointment with the nanny and maybe a playdate later on. He could afford to be lenient. Still, something tugged at him as he waited, an impatience that wasn't entirely about time. Lately, he had noticed things slipping. Lena humming to herself as she played, using songs he didn't recognize. The way she'd stopped asking him to tuck her in at night. A growing familiarity between her and the new nanny, who'd only started 6 weeks ago. 5 minutes became 10. When Lena finally emerged, barefoot and dragging a sheet of paper as wide as her wingspan, Callum's attention refocused entirely. Her curls were wild from sleep, her pajama shirt backward, and a smudge of blue marker streaked across one cheek. She was radiant, utterly unaware of it, beaming with the joy of showing someone something important. "I finished," she said proudly, holding the paper up to her chest. He smiled and opened his arms. She climbed into his lap without hesitation. "What do we have here?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "It's us," Lena said, nestling into his side. "Our family for Miss Kendra's art project." Callum unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing it against the table. It was a drawing in bright crayon colors, simple but expressive. There were 3 figures. One tall man in a blue suit, unmistakably meant to be him, complete with glasses and a laptop in hand. One little girl with curly hair in a yellow dress, Lena, obviously. And then there was the woman. She stood between them, not in the background or off to the side, but central, holding both their hands. She had long auburn hair, a green dress, and a soft smile drawn in delicate, precise lines. A gold necklace glittered against her neck, not colored in, just outlined like Lena hadn't wanted to get it wrong. Callum's brow furrowed. "Who's this?" he asked lightly, pointing to the woman. Lena blinked at him, confused by the question. "That's Mommy." Callum's heart stalled in his chest. "But Lena, that doesn't look like your mom." "She is, Daddy," she said simply, as if he'd forgotten. "That's the one who picks me up sometimes and braids my hair, the one who knows how to make the good sandwiches." He stared at the drawing. "Do you mean Kendra?" he asked carefully. Lena shook her head. "Not Kendra, the other one. She sings when she cooks, you know her." His coffee had gone cold. He set the mug down with a quiet thud, the sound loud in the hush that followed. He didn't know her. Or at least, he didn't recognize the woman his daughter now saw as central to their family. It took him a full minute to find his voice again. "Sweetheart, I don't think I've met this person." Lena looked up at him, frowning now a little defensive. "She's real." "I believe you," he forced a smile. "I just don't think I've seen her yet." Lena squinted, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Then she slid off his lap and padded toward her room again. "I'll find a picture," she called. "You forgot." Forgot, not missed, not failed to notice, forgot. He stood slowly, holding the drawing in his hand, staring down at the 3 of them. His own crayon smile looked too sharp, like he didn't quite fit. The mystery woman looked as if she belonged. Callum Reeves didn't believe in ghosts, nor did he spend time worrying over hallucinations or spiritual metaphors. He dealt in strategy, capital, and efficiency. Yet something about the image, about Lena's certainty, unsettled him more than any quarterly loss or hostile acquisition ever could. And then, as if on cue, his phone vibrated on the counter. A calendar reminder, 8:30 a.m. strategic vision check-in with Lauren. He pressed his thumb to the screen and canceled it. "Lena," he said again, moving toward her door, "tell me more about her." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed him a Polaroid, one he hadn't seen before, one he definitely didn't take. It was grainy but clear enough. The mystery woman was sitting on a picnic blanket, Lena curled into her lap mid-laugh. Her face was turned slightly toward the camera, caught between expressions. She looked kind. And completely unfamiliar. His daughter's face was beaming. The photo wasn't recent, he could tell. The leaves in the background were just turning gold, maybe last fall. He remembered hiring a temp nanny then. A woman named Juliet, maybe, or was it Josephine? He squinted at the picture again. The woman's expression tugged at something in him he couldn't name. Not recognition, not quite. But something dangerously close to regret. Callum didn't mention the drawing again that day. He placed the Polaroid on the edge of his desk like a forgotten paperweight, pretending it wasn't quietly shifting the ground beneath his feet. By afternoon, he had convinced himself it was just a miscommunication. Children misremember things. They attach meaning where there is routine, invent stories out of kindness, out of longing. Lena had always been imaginative. That was all this was. Still, that night he lingered in her doorway after bedtime, watching her sleep. Her arms were wrapped around a stuffed otter, mouth slightly open, a smudge of green still on her temple from the crayons. Her chest rose and fell steadily. He didn't know how to place what he was feeling. Guilt wasn't the right word. It wasn't sharp enough. It was closer to absence. The sinking sense that something vital had been happening around him while he was preoccupied elsewhere, and now it was too late to rewind. The next morning, while Lena was at her friend Harper's house for a playdate, Callum stood in front of the tall cabinet where the nanny contracts were stored. His office at home was usually the only room that gave him comfort, a space of control, linear thinking, clean lines, and hardback books. But today, even his filing system felt accusing. He flipped through the folders, past the contracts with Kendra, with Ruth, with a temp agency that had covered last November. There it was. Juliet Moan. 6 weeks, mid-October to early December. A temporary placement through a smaller service Kendra had recommended when she'd taken medical leave. The file was thin. Just a copy of her resume, some signed NDAs, and a short handwritten note thanking him for the opportunity. His signature was at the bottom, but the lines of his pen were distant, rushed. He tried to remember her face and failed. It wasn't that he hadn't spoken to her. He remembered nodding at someone across the kitchen once, maybe twice. Remembered her putting Lena's jacket on before school, but no clear image formed. Her presence had been so gentle, it hadn't left a dent. Which made it worse. He'd lived in the same house as her. She picked up his daughter from school, helped with homework, maybe even mended skinned knees and read bedtime stories. She'd been there, and he hadn't seen her. He looked at the Polaroid again. Then, on impulse, he called the agency. A young-sounding receptionist answered. "Good morning, Heart and Hearth Care Services. How can I help you?" "This is Callum Reeves. I'm trying to get in touch with a former employee of yours, Juliet Moan. She worked for me briefly last fall." There was a pause on the line. "Just a moment, Mr. Reeves." Click, a hold tone played, a muted piano loop that repeated every 7 seconds. When the voice returned, it belonged to someone older, more direct. "This is Elise, the placement manager. Mr. Reeves, I'm afraid Juliet is no longer in our database. She left the service shortly after her contract with you ended. Do you have forwarding information?" "I'm afraid I can't share personal details. We maintain strict confidentiality." He ran a hand over his face. "This is important. My daughter, she still talks about her. She thinks of her as family." The line went quiet again. After a breath, Elise said, "Mr. Reeves, may I speak frankly?" "Yes." "Juliet didn't leave us with the intention of being found. She wasn't the type to court attention. If she meant to stay in your daughter's life, I think she would have. That said, it's not the first time I've heard a family say something similar." "What do you mean?" "She has a way of leaving an impression, especially with children, but she rarely stays long." Callum exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't help more. After the call, he stood for a long time with the phone in his hand, staring out the window. The city pulsed below, uncaring. Cars moved in neat, distant rows. He built a life up here, above the noise, where everything could be scheduled and anticipated, where no one could get close enough to leave a mark, except apparently someone had. Juliet Moan, who sang when she cooked, who braided his daughter's hair and laughed in a way that was still echoing in their house months later. He didn't recognize her in the picture because he'd never really looked. The realization made his stomach twist. Later that week, during a work dinner at an exclusive rooftop restaurant, he found himself unusually quiet. His associates were laughing over a pitch gone well, toasting some new partnership, and Callum nodded along, but his mind wasn't there. Every so often, he checked his phone for messages from Kendra or Lena, hoping for something. Anything. At home that night, the apartment felt different. Not empty, exactly, but incomplete. As if the shape of someone who once moved through it was still lingering, subtle but unmistakable. He couldn't stop thinking about that green dress, the warmth in her posture. The fact that she had slipped so seamlessly into Lena's emotional orbit while he, the one who shared her blood, had been orbiting from too far out. The next morning, he found Lena sitting on the floor by the window, sunlight tangled in her hair, flipping through the family photo album he hadn't opened in over a year. "Do you want to help me find more pictures of Mommy?" she asked without looking up. He sat beside her, heart thudding. "I thought maybe we could find her together." There was no edge of fantasy in her tone, no dreaminess, just calm assurance, like this was something he should have started sooner. And he nodded. "Okay," he said softly, "let's try." The third photo showed up in a drawer Callum hadn't opened in months. It was tucked beneath a stack of Lena's half-finished craft projects, paper leaves, a bottle of glitter glue sealed shut from disuse, and a popsicle stick frame with no picture inside. He found it while helping Lena look for a missing bead bracelet. The photo was bent at the edges, as if it had been handled often and without much care. But the moment he saw it, he sat down on the floor and didn't get back up for a long time. In the picture, Juliet was crouching in the backyard, holding a paper lantern in one hand and steadying Lena's elbow with the other. Lena looked up at her with the kind of trust that didn't come from time, but from being seen, truly seen. Juliet wasn't looking at the camera. Her gaze was on the flame inside the lantern, like she was thinking about something bigger than the moment but still completely rooted in it. He turned the photo over. No date, no note. "Where did you get this?" he asked Lena, who was now picking through a box of mismatched hair clips nearby. She looked up. "She gave it to me. Before she left, said to keep it somewhere safe." "Why didn't you show me?" Lena shrugged. "You were always working, and I didn't want it to get lost." Callum didn't know what to say to that. He just ran his thumb along the edge of the picture and let it speak for him. That night he didn't open his laptop. Instead, he sat on the couch with Lena as she drew more pictures, another family scene, this time with them all in the kitchen. Him pouring milk, Lena at the table, and Juliet holding a spoon with pancake batter on it. She always drew Juliet in green, always between them. He made a decision the next day. It started small. He asked Kendra to take a week off and cleared his schedule. No meetings, no dinners, no investor calls, just time. Lena didn't ask questions. She just seemed to settle into it like a cat curling into the corner of a sunlit room. It was the first time in years that Callum didn't know what the next day would bring, and for once he didn't mind. They went to the park in the middle of the day, ate grilled cheese on a bench and fed crusts to the birds. He took her to a bookstore and let her pick anything she wanted. They read half of one chapter together before she fell asleep on his shoulder, and he didn't move for nearly an hour. On the fourth day, they walked past a woman painting sunflowers on the window of a tiny cafe. Lena froze. "That's where we saw her once," she said. Callum stopped. "Who?" "Juliet. We got cocoa after it rained. She let me jump in puddles even though my socks got wet. She didn't even get mad." He stared at the cafe. It wasn't the kind of place he would have noticed before. The sign was faded, the windows slightly fogged from the inside. It looked like it belonged to someone who didn't care much for branding but deeply cared about people. Inside, a barista was wiping down a counter. A middle-aged woman with gray curls sat reading a paperback near the window. There was no trace of Juliet. But Lena pulled him inside anyway. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and old wood. There were photographs framed on the walls, some hand-drawn menus, and a shelf full of community flyers. Lena pointed to a chalkboard where someone had drawn a sun with a smiling face. She made that. Callum approached the counter. "Excuse me," he said to the barista. "Do you know someone named Juliet Moan? She used to bring my daughter here." The barista tilted her head. "Juliet, sure, haven't seen her in a while. She worked here part-time last winter, helped redesign our chalkboards. Quiet girl, always reading poetry." "Do you know where she went?" "She left town," the barista said. "Not suddenly, just gradually, like she meant to disappear gently." Callum nodded, disappointed but not surprised. "Thanks." They stayed long enough to split a muffin and sip lukewarm cocoa. Lena hummed quietly under her breath, the same tune he'd heard her sing before. He realized then that Juliet must have sung it to her, maybe during cleanup or story time. And now it was part of her, woven into her habits like a thread stitched quietly beneath the surface. That night after Lena fell asleep, he pulled out the old nanny binder and found Juliet's emergency contact. Not the agency, it was too recent for that, but the one she'd listed when she first applied. A name he hadn't noticed before. Elena Moan. A phone number with a northern area code. A small town 2 hours away. He stared at the number. It could be a dead end, could be an old aunt or just a formality, but it was the only lead he had. So he called. 3 rings, 4. Then a voice answered, tired, older but warm. "Hello. Hi, this is, my name is Callum Reeves. I'm trying to reach someone named Juliet Moan. I believe she's your relative." The voice hesitated. "I'm her mother." Callum exhaled. "I think she helped care for my daughter last fall. She left something behind." "Is it something important?" "Yes," he said softly. "It's my daughter and maybe more than that." The line stayed quiet for a moment. "Juliet been working on a farm just outside of Belmere," her mother said at last. "She doesn't check her phone often, but she's okay. She just needed space. I don't want to intrude, I only want to talk to her, to understand. I'll let her know you called." Callum thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark with the photo in his hand, the one with the lantern. The flame was frozen mid-flicker, caught in the instant before it lifted into the air. He wondered if Juliet had any idea what she'd left behind. And if she'd ever meant to come back. It rained the day he drove to Belmere. A light, steady rain, the kind that blurred the edges of the landscape and made everything seem hushed and temporary. Lena stayed behind with Kendra, who'd returned with a quiet smile and didn't ask questions when he said he needed to take a day for something personal. The highway gave way to smaller roads, then gravel, then a narrow path flanked by pine trees that had begun to soften under spring. His GPS lost signal 3 times. He passed 2 farms that looked abandoned, one old chapel with a sign too faded to read. Then finally, a hand-painted placard on a crooked fence read Moan and Sons, Organic Farm Stand. The farmhouse at the end of the drive was modest, paint peeling, porch sagging slightly, windows streaked with rain, but it was alive. A dog barked once and then retreated. Chickens pecked near a coop. A pale blue pickup truck sat parked beside a rusted wheelbarrow. It was the sort of place where seasons didn't pass so much as settle in. He sat in the car longer than necessary. What exactly was he planning to say? "My daughter sees you as her mother. I didn't notice you when I should have. Can we talk?" It felt too big and too brittle all at once. Then the front door opened. Juliet stepped onto the porch, wearing boots and a weathered coat, her hair tied back in a low braid. She didn't seem startled to see him, just looked out across the rain with a calm, almost wary expression. He climbed out of the car, tucking his hands into his jacket. She didn't move, not away or forward, just waited. "Hi," he said, his voice rough with the weight of the drive. "Hi." They stood like that for a beat, the rain soaking the gravel between them, mist clinging to his collar. "I called your mother. I figured. She said you might not want to talk." Juliet shrugged. "Depends what about." Callum swallowed. About last fall, about Lena. At the mention of her name, something shifted in Juliet's face. Not a smile, not quite, but a softening. A recognition. "She's well," she asked. "She's more than well. She's drawing you into every picture she makes. She remembers the songs you sang. She keeps a photo of you like it's part of her bedtime ritual, and I had no idea." Juliet stepped down off the porch. Mud clung to her boots. She stopped a few feet from him. "You were working," she said gently. "That's not a crime." "I wasn't paying attention." "That's not a crime either." He shook his head. "Maybe not, but it feels like one now." They were quiet again. In the distance, the dog barked once more and went quiet. Callum shifted his weight. "You left without saying goodbye." "I had to," she said simply. "That was the rule. Nannies don't get to linger. We pass through. We're supposed to stay out of the way." "You didn't, not with Lena." Her eyes dropped to the ground. "I didn't mean to get close, but she needed something I recognized." He waited. "I know what it feels like to grow up being looked at but not seen. She's so bright, Callum, so soft and curious and alive. I couldn't ignore her, even if I wanted to." Something caught in his throat. He hadn't cried in years. He didn't plan to now. But the weight of her words landed in his chest like a stone gently placed rather than thrown. "I'm not here to drag you back," he said. "I just needed to tell you I see it now. What she saw, what I missed. You mattered, you still do." Juliet blinked slowly, rain slipping down her cheek like a tear that never asked permission. "She asked me why I left," she said after a moment, "and I couldn't give her an answer, not one that made sense to a child, but the truth is, I didn't know how to stay in a life that didn't make room for me." He nodded, jaw tight. "I want to change that," he said. Juliet looked up at him then, her expression unreadable. "Are you asking me to come back?" "No," he said quietly. "I'm asking if you want to come back." The rain continued, soft and steady. She studied him in that stillness, in the rawness of it. "I'm not the same person anymore," she said. "Neither am I." She smiled then, not a full smile, but something with memory in it. "You're not wearing a watch." "I haven't worn one all week." A pause, that's new. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. "I don't expect an answer now, or even tomorrow. I just needed to say it out loud, that I saw what you did for her, that she's better for having known you, and I'm trying to be too." Juliet looked at him like she was deciding whether to open a window that had been sealed for a long time. "She asked about my pancakes, didn't she?" He laughed, sudden and surprised. "Yes, every time we burn ours." She let out a soft breath. "I used to sneak a dash of cinnamon into the batter." She said it reminded her of fall. "She still talks about that season like it's magic." Juliet reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She drew me something," she said. "I never threw it away." She handed it to him. It was a sketch done in colored pencil, crude, childlike, but unmistakably Lena's. It showed three people in a garden, the same trio. Juliet, Lena, and him. They were planting something together, hands in the soil, faces turned toward each other. "It's not a real memory," she said, "just something she wished for." He held the drawing carefully, like it might break. "Maybe it can be." They didn't say goodbye. She simply walked him back to his car, the silence between them not awkward but heavy with something new. A possibility. He drove back through the mist, with the drawing on the seat beside him. That night Lena asked if he found her. "Yes," he said. "Did she remember us?" "She never forgot." Lena nodded like this made perfect sense. Then she handed him a fresh piece of paper. "This one's for her, you can send it." The picture was another family scene, same green dress, same gentle eyes, but this time there were 4 figures instead of 3. A baby cradled between them, drawn in wobbly lines, no explanation, just there like Lena already believed in more. Callum didn't ask about it. He just smiled and tucked the drawing into his coat pocket, knowing exactly where it needed to go. The first time Juliet visited again, it wasn't arranged in advance. She arrived in the city 3 weeks after their conversation on the farm, unannounced but not unexpected. It was a Sunday morning, the city still yawning awake, and Callum was in the middle of making pancakes with Lena, burning the edges again, despite his best effort to remember the cinnamon. The buzzer rang just as the batter began to bubble. Lena ran for the door before he could stop her. She pressed the intercom button with sticky fingers. "Hello." A familiar voice crackled through, tentative. "Hi, honey, it's Juliet." There was no hesitation. Lena shrieked in delight and turned toward her father. "She's downstairs." Callum wiped his hands on a dish towel, heart thudding in a strange, grateful rhythm. "Okay, let's go let her in." By the time they reached the sidewalk, Juliet was already stepping out of a cab, wearing a navy coat and carrying a cloth bag over her shoulder. She looked different but not unfamiliar. Her hair was loose this time, curls damp from the early morning mist, and her eyes searched the street before landing on them. Lena reached her first, arms outstretched. Juliet dropped to her knees on the concrete and caught her in a full, tight hug, burying her face in her shoulder. She didn't say anything at first, just held her, the way someone does when silence means more than words ever could. Callum stood a few steps back, watching. When Juliet looked up, she met his gaze with something quiet and resolute. She didn't need to explain why she was here. She'd been invited in every way that mattered. They spent the day together, not as guests, not with any defined roles, just three people learning to be near each other again. Juliet didn't stay in the spare room, she didn't unpack, she didn't talk about the future. She just listened to Lena's stories, helped with puzzles, and braided her hair with small white clips that looked like snowdrops. That night after Lena fell asleep, the apartment soft with the hush that only night could bring, Callum found Juliet standing by the window. "You could have waited," he said, stepping beside her. "I didn't want to wait anymore," she replied. "Are you just visiting?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure yet." He nodded. "That's fair." She glanced at him. "Do you want me to stay?" It wasn't a test. There was no challenge in her voice, just a calm willingness to hear the truth. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not as someone who had once filled a gap in his daughter's life, but as someone who had changed the shape of his own. "Yes," he said, "but only if it's something you want, not because of Lena or guilt or old drawings." Juliet studied his face for a long moment. "I want to stay where I'm wanted." "You are." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She sent this." He opened it, the picture Lena had given him weeks ago, the one with 4 figures, a garden again, laughter imagined or remembered, and that 4th figure, a baby swaddled between them. He smiled faintly. "She dreams big." Juliet leaned against the window frame. "That's the beautiful part." They didn't say anything more that night. But Juliet stayed. She didn't move in, not right away. She kept her name on the lease of a small place in Belmere. She took a part-time job at a bookstore nearby. Sometimes she stayed over. Sometimes she left early. There were no declarations, no promises, just slow mornings, warm dinners, long walks through the park with Lena skipping ahead. And small things began to change. Callum started leaving the office earlier. He read bedtime stories instead of emails. He learned how to braid hair, not well but enough that Lena didn't correct him as much. He kept cinnamon stocked in the cupboard. One afternoon in early summer, he picked Lena up from a half-day art camp and found her clutching another drawing, this one folded neatly in her backpack. When he asked what it was, she shrugged. "You can open it when you're ready." He waited until she went asleep. The drawing was simple: a living room, a coffee table, 2 mugs, 3 people curled on a couch, Lena between them, Juliet's head leaning slightly on his shoulder, a book open in his lap. But this time, something was different. There were no outlines this time, no uncertain lines, no half-finished figures. Everything was filled in. He stared at it for a long time. And that's when he realized he wasn't just a figure in the background anymore. Lena had drawn him looking up, engaged, present. A part of the moment. The family wasn't a question mark, it was a sentence. He got up from his chair, turned out the light, and walked quietly down the hall to Juliet's room. The door was ajar. She was curled under the covers, book resting on her chest. He didn't say anything, just slipped the drawing onto the nightstand and kissed her forehead gently. She stirred, eyes blinking open. What was that for? He sat beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. For staying. She closed her eyes again, a smile playing at her lips. You finally saw it. I did. Outside, the city moved around them, constant but quieter now. Inside, the apartment held its shape. Not perfectly, not without effort. But it held. And maybe that was the real drawing, the one they were living into, line by line, day by day.